Welcome to Dental Business RX. Practice success in 30 minutes or less.
Thank you for calling ABC Dental.
Whether we like it or not, staff turnover is a fact of life for every business owner and manager, and that includes dental professionals. No matter how ideal your setup is with relation to staff, people are still going to move, change careers, change their lives, and so on. So there's not much you can do to change that. So you're going to lose some employees at some point over a given period of time. The question is, how do you keep that percentage of turnover as low as possible? The ideal level of turnover is supposed to be 10% or less, yet you often see it a lot higher, especially in other industries, but also in the dental industry. So the question is, how do we keep that as low as we can? And that's what I want to talk about in this week's episode. My name is Jeff Bloomberg, and I'm your host. And look, we know that turning over staff can cost money. There's been estimates on how much it costs to turn over an employee. Probably one of the better ones I've seen is roughly 33% of their annual salary, which could be correct or not. It really depends because some people are overpaid and some people are underpaid, and some people contribute a lot more to the business than you might expect. But we know it costs money. All right, that's not a news flash. But the reason I'm bringing this up is this should be something. This is part of business operations. It's an expectation. Obviously, we want to keep that expectation or the amount we're expecting it to happen very low, but it is something that's going to happen. So it's something that you have to be prepared for. In a lot of cases, when people don't want to look at something, don't want to confront something, don't want to think about something, they don't prepare for that something. Okay, so then they end up being caught, flat-footed, or they end up with a huge problem because they're not prepared. So you want to make sure that you have your infrastructure in place in the practice with regards to hiring, onboarding, and so on. So if this does happen to you, you're prepared. It's something that's going to happen in your business, and it's something that there's really not much you can do about. You just want to keep that as low as possible. So let's look at a couple ways that we can improve on this. And, I've looked at how to present this because this could be a 9-hour podcast. We do a lot of training on the subject of staff, but it sort of boiled down to 3 basic areas for me in the business that affect turnover. And there are certain things you can do to improve in this. So let's look at the first one. First one has to do with whether the person is a bad fit or not. In other words, if you have somebody who is a bad fit for the practice or an employee that you've hired that's a bad fit, and you might wonder how this affects turnover, but I'll explain. If you keep somebody that's a bad fit too long, that will actually create more turnover in your practice. Okay. So keeping somebody who is a bad fit. So then if you want to prevent turnover, you would do the opposite of this. Don't keep people who are a bad fit. Now, when do you know if somebody is a bad fit, and how do you know if somebody's a bad fit? Well, I'm not an employment attorney, so this isn't legal advice. And obviously you have to seek your own counsel on these things. Everybody's responsible for their own condition. But for me, what's always been a pretty decent measuring stick is if I hire somebody to do a specific job, and look, I'll be very general. Their tasks are A, B, and C. I've hired you to do A, B, and C. Well, I know if they're a good or bad fit by seeing if they're actually doing A, B, and C. Are they performing? Because let's look at it. What is it that you're hiring somebody to do? You're hiring someone to do something so that you don't have to do it. In exchange for that, they're part of your team and you pay them. So if someone's not doing the things that you're hiring them to do, well, then that, even if they're a nice person, they may be somebody that you go have lunch with. They're a really nice person. You might hang out with them, but they're just not a good fit for the business because you hired them to do A, B, and C, and they're not doing A, B, and C. Well, how soon should I know whether they're going to, how long am I waiting to see if they're going to do A, B, and C? I'm not giving it very long. If I've hired someone to do A, B, and C, and they're not showing me signs that they can do it after a couple weeks, then they're probably not a good fit. So, for example, you've hired someone to be a receptionist, right? So let's say in your office, receptionist is defined as somebody who answers the phone and schedules patients. So I've trained them on some of the basic things. I'm giving them pieces of their job, little bits and pieces, the less complex pieces in the beginning, and then I'm feeding them the more complex pieces as time goes on. And I've given them bits and pieces, and they're executing those well, repetitively, not just once. And then I'm giving them more, and then giving them more. And, after a couple weeks, they're doing most of what I've asked them to do. Of course, there's little mess ups here and there. Well, then they're probably going to be a good fit. This is probably going to work out. Conversely, I've hired this person, and after a week or two, they're still not doing the basic things that I've asked them to do. They're very apologetic about it, and they're very nice. They're a very pleasant person. Well, they're probably still a bad fit because I hired them to do A, B, and C, and they're not doing A, B, and C. And this assumes that I've done some basic training, folks. It's not like I just hired them to be the receptionist and said, there's the phone, there's the name of the practice, goodbye. I'm helping them pick up their job. So you might wonder, well, how is letting this person stay on creating more turnover? Wouldn't it create more turnover if I fire them? Well, no, because there's a couple things that go wrong when you keep somebody who really isn't a good fit for your business. First thing, obviously, is it negatively affects the business. The job isn't being done. Things are not happening the way that they're supposed to. We probably have drops or sags in productivity. But if you've got other employees, let's say I have 3 people at the front and I've hired this new receptionist. Well, if they're not doing the job that they've been hired to do, who's picking up the slack? It's probably the other people at the front. Okay. And that's not good. It'll start to, create stress on those other positions and possibly lower the performance of those other positions. The other thing that tends to happen is the longer I keep somebody, the more pies that they're putting their fingers in, the more entrenched they become in the business, the more difficult they are to move on from. Okay. If I had employee A, and let's say they had to leave the state. They had to go take care of some sick family in another state for 2 years, so they're gone. But employee A was a really excellent employee, so they had to leave rather abruptly. And I replace employee A with employee B, and employee B I see after a week or two just isn't going to cut it, and I move on, and I hire employee C. You might go, well, that's turnover. Well, not really. I don't consider firing somebody after a week or two because they couldn't do the job to be turnover. The turnover was when A left. Okay. And let's say I hire employee C, or I might make it to employee D. I spent a week or two with C and they didn't make it. And now D makes it. So D finally replaces A. I'm sorry, I'm using all these alphabet or these letters, but you get the idea. I'm not fretting over, you don't sit there and freak out. Oh my gosh, I got rid of Joe. He was with me for 2 weeks. That's not turnover. Turnover is, Susie was with me for 5 years and left. That's turnover. Okay. So you put stress on the other employees. You also just put stress on yourself. I've seen, because let's look at the simplest way to handle this, folks. I hire somebody to do tasks A, B, and C, and they're not doing them. They're not doing them. So what do you do? Now, I'll tell you what I've seen happen. This is what not to do first, is I've seen it where you hire somebody to do A, B, and C, and they don't like doing A, and they don't like doing C, but they like doing B. Okay. So then instead of, getting somebody who could actually do A, B, and C, you go, okay, well, I'll let them do B, and I'll pay other people to do A and C, or I'll reassign those tasks. I'm changing because this person can't carry out the tasks that I'm giving them to do. Why would I do that? Why don't I just get somebody who could carry? I've seen this. Someone gets hired to be the schedule coordinator, but they don't like calling people. All right, so we'll have them file insurance. But I'm paying for a schedule coordinator. Why don't I get somebody who could actually be a schedule coordinator? I don't need to pay somebody this much to file insurance. You tracking with this? So if you hire somebody to do a job, maybe there is another job in the practice they can do that's equal to the amount of pay that they're getting, fine. But if I hire them to do the job and they're not doing the job, I'm going to find somebody else who can actually, do the job. So what would I do if I've hired them and they're not cutting it on the job? It's real simple. I would tell them, hey, so, we've done this. You're still messing this up after 2 weeks. I'm not going to vilify them or make them feel like a horrible person because in most cases they want to do a good job. They're just not doing it. And I might tell them, look, I need to see a change in this, and this, or I'm probably going to have to replace you. Some people might think that's brutal or mean or this or that or whatever. I personally think it's kind because in a lot of cases, if you tell somebody, they may think they're doing a great job. You just haven't said anything. Maybe you look frustrated. Maybe you're having a bad day. They don't know why you look so frustrated. But if you don't tell them, how are they supposed to know? They don't have ESP. So in a lot of cases, you could tell somebody they're messing up and show them what they're messing up. In a lot of cases, they'll fix it or at least try to fix it, in which case, great, then you might actually have a really good employee. I've done that a ton of times over my career where I've pointed out how somebody's not performing and seen them turn things around. Or you might tell them, look, you're having problems with this, and this, and I need to see this corrected. And they may tell you, well, I really hate this job. Okay, then shake hands and they can move on. Why keep them at that point? They hate the job. They're already looking for another job at that point, and I'm going to be looking for a replacement, so why not start looking now and send them on their way? Okay? So talk to the person. Again, like I said, not an employment attorney. You got to seek your own guidance on this, but I would rather just tell the person and be honest with the person. I'm not going to be mean about it. I'm going to be very factual. And if I really am thinking I have to replace this person, I'm going to tell them. I'll tell you what I'm not going to do. I'm not going to get unusual about it and let them not do the parts of the job they don't like. If their job includes those things, I'm not going to not say anything and instead just, feel terrible about this person and think that I'm going to replace them and not say anything to them. I've seen that where, employee A is doing a terrible job. So somebody hires employee B and then has employee A train employee B, not knowing they're getting fired. In other words, I'm training this person to replace me. Like, what? Also, you're firing employee A because they're doing a bad job. Why would I want them to perpetuate all their errors with employee B? I'm not going to do that. What I am going to do is I'm going to have them do the job I hired them to do. Maybe there's another place I can use them in the practice, and that's fine. But for the most part, I'm going to do that. If I have someone who's a bad fit, I'm going to move on. I'm not going to, and that's going to reduce my turnover, believe it or not, in the long run. Okay. Next thing that tends to cause turnover that you can sort of nip in the bud that'll prevent turnover is having, and I don't know what's the best way to describe this, like a toxic other employees, problem employees, someone might call them a bad apple, whatever you want to call them, a toxic or problem employee, or letting problem patients run amok in the practice will also cause turnover. Okay. So if I have a negative employee who's rude to all the other staff and is not performing, okay, they're not performing. And sometimes people think that non-performance is going to be remedied by time. If I just leave them there long enough, eventually they'll have this, huge realization and start to do a good job. That very rarely happens. It's like me telling you, you find a pit in my tooth and you go, gee, Jeff, we should put a little filling in there and go, no, doc, if I leave it alone, it will heal over time. Like, of course, that's ridiculous. Okay. So if I have this problem employee and they're rude to the other staff, they're non-performing, et cetera, and I let them continue to be in the practice and do nothing about it, it will affect the rest of the office environment, the office culture, the office, mood. It also isn't good for the rest of the team. Same thing applies with a problem patient. Let's say I have a patient who's rude to the staff, mean to the hygienist, and I do absolutely nothing about that. Well, between that problem other employee or that problem patient, that actually creates a stressful working environment. If I have a coworker who's just negative and nasty and not productive, like I'm having to do half their job and they're just not a nice person, I don't want to go to work. Okay? So it's stressful for me. And if somebody offers me another job where I don't have to deal with all that drama, that sounds good to me. Okay? Same thing with patients. If, patients can come in and treat me like garbage and nobody's doing anything about that, that's a stressful work environment. It's not a safe working environment. Maybe I'm physically safe, mentally I'm not, okay? So there's another problem that develops as a result of this. So yeah, it's a stressful work environment. The reason it's stressful is nobody is doing anything about it. If I'm your receptionist and let's say your financial coordinator is a problem, okay? I can't do anything about the financial coordinator. I'm not the boss. I also don't want to sit and go to the office manager every time he or she is like negative, nasty, or mean to me. I start to feel like a tattletale. All right? It's just stressful. Sunday night comes and I'm, oh man, I don't want to go to work tomorrow. Well, this is a failure from the executive position in the practice, from the office manager and the doctor positions. Nobody is actually maintaining, some order in that business. And they're actually sending the wrong message to the team. So here's this toxic employee. We'll start with a potential toxic employee. I got this problem employee, the financial coordinator. They're late all the time. They're mean. They're non-performing. And I'm the receptionist. I try to show up on time. I try to do my job. I try to do everything you ask me to do, right? And this person doesn't. And I know it because I see it. And I'm picking up some of the slack from them because they're not doing their job. Well, what message are you sending to me as an employee? You're telling me that behavior pattern is okay. That is acceptable here because you don't even have to say it. You're demonstrating it. right? Same thing with if you let toxic type, or problem patients treat me like garbage and treat the rest of the staff like garbage. You're telling me that I'm not that important. What's important? And look, I agree. I don't agree that the customer's always right, because that's not true. And I agree that customers are important, but they're not so important that I'm going to let them trash the team. We're a team too, right? We're all supposed to work together. The funny thing is, very few patients are actually like that. You probably count them on your hand in your practice. Well, again, I'm telling the staff they're not important and it's okay for people to trash you. That's just not a good working environment. That is going to cause huge amounts of turnover problems, all right? Because then there's too much drama. And that drama is all coming from 1 or 2, maybe 5 if you count the patients involved, people. So the way to prevent the turnover in those cases, if you have a problem person, they're rude, they're nasty, they're mean, they're negative. Again, look, this behavior pattern needs to change. I'm a big fan of that. I'm a huge fan of that. If someone is not doing what it is they're supposed to do, I will tell them. And I do it not unemotionally. I don't tell them in monotonously, you are not doing your job, but I will tell them without embroidering anything I'm going to say. I'm going to tell them exactly what's going on and what they're doing wrong, because I want to give the person an opportunity to change. And, early in my career, I was helping, it was kind of a budding new executive, and I was helping with the HR department. And I remember I had to witness somebody getting fired, and they were shocked they were getting fired. This is a long time ago. And I realized they were shocked they were getting fired because nobody told them or they were doing a bad job. And then finally, I guess the powers that be at that point had decided that they'd had enough. And I made a decision at that point that I would never have anybody shocked if I was going to fire them. I've hired a lot of people and fired a lot of people in my career, and I would never have them shocked if I was going to fire them. They would know it was coming. So I've always practiced that. I'll tell somebody, hey, you're not doing a good job. You need to correct this. Maybe I don't say it like that. I'd say, look, we're having some issues with this. We need to correct X, Y, and Z. Do they correct it? Look, I talked to you about correcting X, Y, and Z. What's happening? Maybe I'll find something behind that, right, that's causing that problem that we can sort of fix. Maybe they don't know how to do something or don't understand something. Fine. But let's say it gets to the point where, they're late or some pattern of behavior that's unacceptable to the business is perpetuated. Then I'll tell them, look, this needs to correct or I'm probably going to let you go. So then the next time it happens, when they finally are seeing me, it's not like this huge shock, right? They know, yeah, okay, I messed up. And we can actually end on nice terms at that point. And it's not a huge shock to them. And I gave them plenty of chances to sort of turn things around, and they just didn't. So they know it's on them. So if I have somebody who's a problem, like what would I do with that toxic employee? I'd point out what they're doing and be very specific about what they need to correct. Maybe they'll correct it. Maybe they can get over whatever's happening. Same thing with a patient. I talk about this in seminars. If I have a patient who's rude to I do it here with clients. If I have a client who's rude to my receptionist, I'm going to talk to them. And if their answer is, well, I'm the customer and I'm always right, and to heck with you, then they should just leave. Because why do I don't need to subject myself or my team to this. Why? What's the point, right? Like, we're all here to, we have a mission in this business. We're trying to accomplish something. And obviously we run into speed bumps from time to time, but I'm not going to subject myself or others to something that they just don't have to deal with. So we got that point. You have a bad fit, which maybe isn't, the person is not a good, or not problem or a problem, but they're just a bad fit. They can't do the job, right? Or we have somebody who's that problem employee or problem patient, okay? And you're allowing them to just run amok. All right. Next thing has to do with, if I want to reduce turnover, would be it has to do with training and onboarding and management, right? It's an article I read recently. I'll put a copy of it on the episode webpage, where it pointed up that good onboarding can increase employee retention by 69% for up to 3 years, right? Like, onboarding was a big deal. Well, what is onboarding? It's not just signing my paperwork and my tax forms. It's learning how the business works and how things are done and what the company culture is, and then learning what my job is, what is expected of me. Like, I would start that process as a part of the whole hiring process. When you're hiring somebody, because I've seen that happen, someone will get hired and it's not fully understood what is expected of them. I mean, I'm not going to spend an hour and a half explaining a job during a job interview, but I am going to go over the big bullet points. When do we work? What the objective of the job is? I'm hiring going to be the scheduler, so I'm expecting a productive schedule that's properly scheduled, and blah, blah, blah. I'm going over what the hours are, what the pay is, what the incentives are. I want them to fully understand what they're getting themselves into, because if it's something that they don't want to do, I don't have to hire them. They don't have to take the job. you see, then I avoid a lot of headaches right from the get-go. I'm not going to take somebody who doesn't fit what I'm looking for, right? Well, I can only work Tuesday through Saturday. Well, the job is Monday through Friday. That's a deal breaker. Why am I going to try and I'm not going to go, okay, well, I guess you could work Tuesday through Saturday and you could make reactivation calls on set. Why would I do that? I see people do this. They hire somebody to be the schedule coordinator, like I said, and they don't want to make calls. Like, why? No, they do the job you're hiring for them, and that should start during the interview process. All right. And then once you bring them on, the funny thing about training, and I know I mentioned training, and usually I get a funny reaction, especially with a new client, when I talk about staff training materials and manuals and things like this. First off, I get a very broad agreement that having manuals and training materials is really good. But the doc I'm talking to or office manager does not have them. And the idea of putting them together is so overwhelming, it almost puts them to sleep. How would I ever get this done? Well, one thing I will tell you about training materials, this is a case where something is better than nothing. If I have a job description, that is better than no job description. If I have a policy on, how I want money collected in my practice, that is better than no policy. You have to start somewhere, not to get too trite, but every journey starts with the first step. Write something, do something, keep it simple, have some basic job descriptions and build from there. You also live in an age where audiovisual products and materials and equipment is cheaper than ever, easier than ever, and easier to disseminate to your staff than ever. You can record things. If you want to tell people what your mission statement is, your staff what the mission statement is, make a video. iPhone phone quality is unbelievable. Get a little cheap tripod from Amazon. It's better than nothing. Okay, folks? So you have decent onboarding things in place to sort of gen somebody into what's expected in the practice. You have simple training materials to sort of bring them up to knowing what you're expecting of them. And part of this is not just how do I schedule patients, right? Or how do I use the software? It's what's expected of me. So you could tell me how to achieve those expectations. That's training. But what's the eventual outcome? So you tell me, okay, we're collecting $80,000 a month and producing $80,000 a month right now. I don't have a scheduler, so if I'm going to make you my scheduler, I expect that income to go up to $120,000 a month because you're going to make my schedule more efficient. Here's how you schedule people. Now you're showing me how to achieve those expectations. But that expectation is very important because if you don't give me guidance or don't give me expectations, I'm going to assume what you want me to do because most staff are good people. And they're going to want to do what they think you want them to do. Well, if you don't tell them what you want them to do, they're going to kind of figure it out on their own. But what they figure out may not be what you want. So the expectations should be very, very, very clear from when you hire them. And they should be constantly reiterated. Look, this is what we're going for. These are the goals. And that should be part of the management philosophy as well. When you're training somebody and you're putting them on a job, right? Obviously, you have to sort of pay close attention because if I'm the office manager and I've had a schedule coordinator to take that position from me, let's say, well, I'm ultimately responsible for everything as the manager, and I'm still responsible for this job till this person can actually do it. Okay, so I'm giving them bits and pieces so that they can do more and they can do more and they can do more and they can do more, and eventually handling the whole job over when I can see that they can do it all. And when they're messing up, I'm correcting them. All right, I'm showing them what they did wrong and fixing it so that they do it right next time. And if the mess ups become too big or continuous or are perpetuated and they're unfixable, then maybe this person isn't a good fit. Do you see? But and it's kind of funny because I've read a bunch of articles where one of the ways to reduce staff turnover, just, or different things I've seen, is to trust your team. You have to trust your team. And look, there are people on my team I would probably trust with my life, right? And I hope they trust me the same. But that wasn't just something that I conferred on them the second I met them. Because some people are very worthy of trust. Some people are not worthy of trust at all. I'm not saying here, but in general. And trust is something that's earned, right? And it's not one of these things where, I might have somebody who I trust to drive my car, but I wouldn't trust them to go collect $50,000 from a patient, right? Trust is earned and there's levels of trust. I'd let somebody babysit my kid, but I wouldn't let them, set up a room for a certain type of procedure. Like they don't know how to do it. Trust is earned by showing that someone actually does what it is that they're supposed to do. And you build that trust with an employee. Let's say you have a treatment coordinator. First you show them how to do the basics of the job. Then they sit in with you. Then you kind of hand them more and more pieces of the job as time goes on. Now they're doing the application with the patient for Care Credit or Lending Club or whomever, right? But you're still sticking around to make sure that it actually got done. And for the larger case, you're in the room and maybe you're popping in at the end. Then maybe one day they're like, hey, Bill, Jeff, Sue, whatever whoever's listening, right? Hey, I got this. You can go. But you're keeping an eye. And now you're managing. And you're going over goals and what's expected and what's happening on their job on a day-to-day basis. You can kind of back off a little bit, right? So it's not really a trust issue. I mean, I guess the converse of this is you could have somebody who's completely paranoid about trusting people. I don't trust anybody. And they micromanage. Did you do this? Did you do that? Well, that's also stupid. All right. But if I hire a new receptionist who has zero experience in dental at all, and I go, oh, good, take all my new patient calls that cost me $300 a phone call, and I'm not going to watch what they're doing because I trust them. That's just kind of dumb in my opinion. Trust is earned, just like you earn your employees' trust by doing what you say you're going to do and setting a good example. But I think it's kind of a misuse of the word. Trust, like knowing that you're going to do something, is earned, but at least hoping that the person could do the job is something that you should do. You shouldn't put there that they can't do it or check on everything they do, even if they already know how to do it. If it's something that somebody routinely knows how to do, say you're the office manager and you have 2 dental assistants that have been with you for 8 years and you're still checking every room to see how they set the room up for a procedure, even though they've done it for 8 years, then it's kind of like, come on. That's a little bit ridiculous. So anyway, I wanted to throw that out there because I've seen it thrown out there or talked about. I think it's just kind of silly in that regard. So, good training, good onboarding, correcting people when they mess up. Very, very important things to do. Okay. All right. Brings us to the last part. How do you reduce turnover? Well, generally, and this is where I see people go wrong. It's specifically what it is giving people a future. Giving people a future. So what do I mean by that? Well, you can get into the frame of mind that, your office is a machine, right? It's a machine, and you've got scheduling and financial, and you've got the, production, and you've got hygiene, and the machine. Well, machine has parts, right? So if my, alternator breaks in my car, I get a new alternator, right? It's a part. I just plug that part in. Or your hard drive breaks, you get it. Well, that's maybe a bit catastrophic for a computer, but, your mouse breaks, you buy a new mouse. All right. Well, people are not parts. People, figuratively, we can say an organization is a machine, but it's not a machine. People are people. People are individuals. They have goals. They have dreams. They have thoughts. They have ideas. And people have, career paths that they've chosen and where they'd like to be. And some people are more ambitious than others. And if you want to create an environment where people are with you for a long time, then to a degree, what they want to do has to marry up with what you're trying to do. So if you have a practice and it's, sort of a small to middling practice, it's not too bad. It makes you a nice living and you work 25 hours a week and you're really not interested in growing it at all. And you're looking for somebody that you're paying $15 an hour to answer the phone. But this person's very ambitious and wants to, really move on to bigger things in their career. Well, you're going to bring them in and they're not going to be there for a long time because you're just a step on the way to their ultimate destination. Do you see? So I like to know what the career goals are work-wise for my team members that I'm hiring, because then I can see, does it fit with what I'm trying to do? I mean, this can be as silly as if, let's say I'm applying for the dental assistant position in your office and you go, Jeff, well, where do you see your career going? What's your career goal here? And I go, well, I want to assist for another 6 months, and then I plan on getting into an entirely different profession. Well, I've already told you 2 things there. Number one, I'm not going to work for you for longer than 6 months, which you may not want to hire me at that point. And it really doesn't align with what we're trying to do here. Now, I'm also not expecting someone to say, I want to work for your office for the rest of my life. Like, they don't know that yet. They haven't worked there, and I don't know that yet. I haven't worked with them. But I have to provide upward mobility in the practice. Now, in order to provide upward mobility, I have to have some type of goals or long-term strategy to grow. So let's say I have somebody, and people have varying levels of ambition, right? I might have somebody who really enjoys being the financial coordinator in my practice. They get incremental raises over time and they're part of my incentive plan, and they work 38 hours a week and they are completely happy and they are super competent and I love having them. Then I have somebody else that maybe was a dental assistant, and then I move them up to some type of a junior managerial position because they want to take on more and earn more and help the practice more. And now I want to open up another location, and I'm putting them in the second location. And eventually they're a regional manager. And do you see? You have to allow some room for growth. It cannot be just I hate to use the term dead end job, but if it's like that example I brought up earlier, it's $15 an hour and I have big goals. Well, that's not my long-term plan. So I like to know with my team, like what are they trying to create? What's their game? Because then, you can find future players you can do your games with, right? I mean, this is a great way to build if you wanted to, I've talked about this before, if you want to build multiple practices, you might have an associate who's real hungry. And this happens with associates. They come work for somebody. They eventually want to go open their own practice and they leave and go open their own practice. Well, why not? You're the experienced doctor. You're the one who's not only more clinically experienced, but you're more established business-wise. Why not have a setup to where you're helping them open the second office and your partner's in it? Then you're opening a third office together. You bring other associates in. You're actually finding other teammates. And that's the way I look at it. So I like to know the people I'm working with, what their ambitions are and do they align with what the ambitions I have for the business are, and what role do they want to play? Do they want to play a limited role? Do they want a bigger role? And can I accommodate that role? Because if I can, then they're probably going to be with me for quite a long time. Okay. So that's the fourth thing that you can do to reduce turnover. And I know I kind of rambled in this one. I apologize. There were a number of different ways I looked at doing it. And I think the original way I did the outline for this thing, I would have been going for about 8-9 hours, which marathon audiobook, maybe someday, right? But I hope this helps. I hope these are things that you can start using on Monday in your practice. And again, as I mentioned, I'm not an employment attorney. So, if you have questions like that, it's definitely good to have one. I also have as a download, if you want, I issued these a few weeks ago, but I did it during the holiday. So I don't know how many people caught it. We have these employee checklists, which are helpful for onboarding new employees quickly. They come from our online platform, DDS Success, which I talked about a little bit earlier. I'll put the link on the episode webpage. You can download these. There's, for scheduling and collections and things like this. It helps you get people knowing what the different parts of their job are a lot faster, and they're customizable. And you can use those as well if you have newer employees. Again, I hope this helps. If you have any questions, you can find us online at mgeonline.com. You can call us also at 800-640-1140. You can also email me directly if you have any questions at jeffb@mgeonline.com. Folks, have a great week, and we'll see you at the next episode.